Hold up. There.
Silk scarf. Expensive.
I'll mark it. Number 1.
All right, let's keep going.
Blouse. Same style.
Copy.
2. That's 11 total now.
And that's where they lead.
Smell it?
Yeah, calling it in. Stand by.
Pool house interior, approximately 800 square feet. Bar area, seating, 2 changing rooms. Cabinets are empty. Row of lockers, most open, empty. Got 3 locked. Need cutters. First one, floral dress purse. ID belongs to Julia Hahn. Inputting. This person's...
Floor is hollow. Get a pry tool up here. On it. Box inside, I have a phone, wallet, keys, necklace, photographing. Phone's got charge. Powering on. That's someone's lock screen. Recent.
Rooms 3, 6, and 7 are now crime scenes.
All sealed.
Copy. Moving to the next building.
Got a bracelet here. Engraving reads Emily Reyes, 61412.
Copy. Logged as item 19.
Patrol, can you run that name?
Affirmative. Matches missing person report, June 2012.
September 3rd, 2019, 2:47 p.m., U.S. Virgin Islands, Caribbean Sea, Coast Guard vessel footage, Lieutenant Commander David Chen. Top 5. Coast Guard Station Charleston, this is Cutter Vigilant. We're approaching Epstein Island, approximately 12 nautical miles southeast of the harbor, conducting welfare check as requested. The family hasn't been heard from in 16 days. Over. The radio crackles before dispatch responds. Copy that, Vigilant. Be advised, the Epstein family has owned that island since 1847. They're private. Local authorities have attempted contact multiple times without success. Proceed with caution. I look at the island growing larger through the bridge windows. Epstein Island. Everyone in Charleston knows the name, even if nobody talks about it openly. The Epstein have been one of the wealthiest families in the Southeast for over a century and a half. Old money, old secrets, old rules that don't apply to anyone else. The island itself is about 300 acres, most of it dense forest surrounding a compound that nobody except invited guests has ever seen. No public records of what's on the island, no building permits on file, no inspections, no surveys, no official documentation of any kind. The Epstein have lawyers who make problems disappear, and enough money to ensure that curiosity stays unrewarded. But 16 days of radio silence, missed business meetings, and unanswered calls from concerned associates finally triggered enough alarm bells that someone with authority requested a welfare check, that someone was a federal judge who owed the family favors and wanted to make sure his benefactors were still breathing. We anchor offshore and deploy a small boat. 4 of us. Myself, Petty Officer Rodriguez, Seaman Walsh, and a paramedic named Thompson in case we find medical emergencies. The dock is empty when we arrive. No boats, no staff, no signs of life. Just weathered wood and the smell of salt and something else underneath. Something organic, something wrong. Coast Guard, I announce as we tie off. We're conducting a welfare check. Is anyone on the island? No response. Just the sound of waves and wind and birds that seem too quiet, too cautious, like they know something we don't. The path from the dock leads through a tunnel of live oaks draped with Spanish moss. It's beautiful in a way that feels deliberate, landscaped to impress, designed to make visitors feel small. But there's something off about it now. The moss hangs. Too heavy. The shadows fall too dark. The silence presses in from all sides like a physical presence. We emerge from the trees and I get my first look at the Epstein compound. It's massive. A main house that looks like it belongs on a plantation tour. White columns and wraparound porches and windows that reflect the afternoon sun. Surrounding it, a dozen smaller structures. Guest houses, staff quarters, what looks like a private chapel, and several buildings whose purpose I can't identify. Everything is pristine. Manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, fresh paint on every surface. The kind of maintenance that requires a full-time staff of dozens. But there's no one here. No groundskeepers, no security, no household staff. Just empty buildings and empty lawns, and that smell, stronger now, coming from somewhere deeper in the compound. We check the main house first. The front door is unlocked. Inside, everything looks normal at first glance. Expensive furniture, original artwork. The accumulated wealth of 6 generations displayed in every room. But as we move deeper, I start to notice things. The dining room table is set for 12. Food still on the plates, rotted now, covered in flies and mold. Glasses of wine turned to vinegar. A celebration interrupted. Abandoned mid-meal without anyone clearing a single dish. The living room shows signs of a struggle. A chair overturned. A lamp broken on the floor. Dark stains on the carpet that Thompson identifies as blood. Not enough for a fatality, but enough to indicate violence. And on the walls, written in something brown and flaking that I don't want to think about too carefully, a single phrase repeated over and over. They finally came for us. I photograph everything. I call it in. I request backup, forensic teams, anyone who can help make sense of what we're seeing. But the radio just gives me static. No signal. No connection to the mainland. Just us and the island and whatever happened here 16 days ago. Rodriguez finds the basement. That's where things get worse. The basement of the Epstein main house extends further than the foundation should allow. We descend 3 flights of stairs into a space that feels carved from the bedrock itself, walls of rough stone giving way to something older, something that wasn't built but excavated, exposed, revealed. The smell is overwhelming down here. Decay and chemicals and something else, something sweet and rotten that coats the back of my throat and makes my eyes. Water. Our flashlights cut through darkness that seems to press back, to resist illumination, to want to remain unseen. We find the first room at the bottom of the stairs. It's a laboratory. Or it was. Tables covered in equipment I don't recognize. Glassware and tubing and machines whose purpose I can't begin to guess. Notebooks filled with handwriting so dense and cramped it's barely legible. Diagrams of things that look biological but don't match any anatomy I've ever studied. And specimens. Dozens of jars lining the walls, filled with preserved something. Not animals. Not exactly human. Something in between. Something wrong. Developmental stages of creatures that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist, that exist anyway in the formaldehyde-clouded darkness of the Epstein basement laboratory. What the hell were they doing down here? Rodriguez's voice is barely a whisper. I don't answer. I don't have an answer. The next room is worse. It's a medical facility. Operating tables with restraints. Surgical equipment laid out with precision. Monitors and IV stands and recovery beds arranged in rows, like a hospital ward, like a place designed to treat many patients at once. But the patients weren't sick. The charts on the walls tell a different story. Subjects, not patients. Numbers, not names. Detailed records of procedures performed, modifications attempted, results observed. The Epstein weren't treating illness. They were conducting experiments. Human experiments based on the anatomical references. Experiments that had been running for generations based on the dates on the oldest files. Experiments that produced the things in the jars. The things that were almost human, but not quite. The things that were becoming something else. We find the family in the third room, all of them. Marcus Epstein, the patriarch, his wife Eleanor, their 3 adult children and their spouses, their 7 grandchildren, 15 people in total, arranged in a circle on the floor, their bodies positioned with obvious care, their hands linked, their eyes open and staring at the ceiling. They've been dead for approximately 16 days. The decomposition matches the timeline, but the cause of death isn't obvious. No wounds, no signs of violence, no indication of what killed them. They're just dead, all 15 of them, arranged like they were performing some kind of ritual, like they were waiting for something, like they died in the middle of an act that required all of them together. And in the center of the circle there's a hole. Not a hole in the floor. A hole in reality. A space where the light doesn't go, where the air doesn't move, where looking too long makes my head pound and my vision blur. It's about 6 feet in diameter, perfectly circular, perfectly dark, perfectly wrong. The bodies are arranged around it like offerings, like sacrifices, like the final act of a family that had been preparing for something for over a century and a half. I don't know what they were trying to do. I don't know if they succeeded. But standing in that basement, looking at that hole that isn't a hole, feeling the wrongness radiating from it like heat from a fire, I know one thing with absolute certainty. Something came through. Something they summoned or called or invited. Something that took them, consumed them, used them for whatever purpose they had been breeding toward for 6 generations. The Epstein didn't disappear. They completed their work. And whatever. They created, whatever they released, whatever they became, it's not on this island anymore. It's out there somewhere. And it's only the beginning. Top 4. The official investigation began 3 days after our initial discovery. Federal agencies I'd never heard of descended on Epstein Island, locked down the site, and began cataloging everything the family had left behind. I was kept on as a liaison, partly because I'd made the initial discovery, partly because the agencies involved wanted someone local who understood the political sensitivities of investigating one of Charleston's founding families. The documentation process took 4 months. What they found would never be released to the public. What I'm describing now comes from my own observations and the fragments I was able to piece together from conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear. The Epstein family had been conducting a breeding program. That's the clinical term the investigators used. A breeding program spanning 6 generations, carefully documented, meticulously planned. The earliest records dated to 1847, when Cornelius Epstein purchased the island with wealth accumulated through means the documents didn't specify. The program had 2 components. The first was genetic. The Epstein had been selectively breeding within their own family and with carefully chosen outside partners, attempting to cultivate specific traits that the records described in language I couldn't understand. References to bloodline, purity, to ancestral markers, to something called the preparation that required generations of careful cultivation to achieve. The second component was worse. The specimens in the jars, the operating rooms, the medical facilities, those weren't for the Epstein themselves, they were for others, people brought to the island over the decades, selected according to criteria the records didn't fully explain, subjected to procedures designed to test, to refine, to perfect the techniques that would eventually be applied to the family's own offspring. The investigation found evidence of at least 200 subjects over the family's history, people who came to the island and never left, people whose bodies were never recovered, whose disappearances were never investigated, whose existence was erased by Epstein money and Epstein influence, and the convenient isolation of a private island where no one came unless invited. Most of them were drifters, homeless people, immigrants, the kinds of people who could vanish without anyone asking questions, but some of them were different. Some of them were children. The records for this subset were kept separately, in a vault that required 3 different keys to open. The children were special, according to the documents, more receptive, more malleable, better suited for the advanced procedures that the later generations of Epstein had developed. I stopped reading after the 3rd file. Some knowledge isn't worth carrying. The investigation found 13 bodies buried in a section of the island that satellite imagery showed had been disturbed regularly over the past century. 13 bodies that could be identified through dental records and DNA analysis. 13 people who had been reported missing over the past 40 years from locations across the southeast. 13 families who would finally learn what happened to their loved ones. But 13 was just the beginning. Ground-penetrating radar revealed more burial sites. Dozens of them, scattered across the island, some so old that the bodies had decomposed to nothing but bone fragments. The full count would never be determined. Some graves were too deep. Some contained remains too degraded for analysis. Some were simply too numerous to excavate without resources that no agency was willing to commit. The official estimate, the number that appeared in classified reports, was somewhere between 200 and 400 victims over the family's tenure on the island. 200 to 400 people, sacrificed to a breeding program designed to produce something that the Epstein believed would change the world. The question no one could answer was whether they had succeeded. The hole in the basement floor remained a mystery. Analysis couldn't determine what it was. Instruments behaved erratically in its presence. Photographs showed only darkness, regardless of lighting conditions. Video footage corrupted within seconds of being recorded, and anyone who stood too close reported the same symptoms: headaches, nausea, a sense of being watched from somewhere very far away. The current theory, the one that circulates among the agencies involved, is that the Epstein created something, a doorway, a gateway, an opening to somewhere else, somewhere that isn't in any geography we understand. The family's final act wasn't suicide, it was completion. They opened the door they had spent 6 generations building, and something came through, something that took them, something that didn't stay on the island. The hole has been sealed now, concrete and steel and materials I wasn't cleared to know about, buried under 100 feet of earth and rock, monitored by sensors that track activity no one will explain. Epstein Island has been designated a federal research site, closed to all public access, its history erased from every database that matters. But the door was open for 16 days before we arrived. 16 days when whatever the Epstein released had free access to the mainland. 16 days when something that took generations to create had time to spread, to hide, to become whatever it was designed to become. The investigation is ongoing. The search is continuing. But we don't know what we're looking for. We just know that the Epstein work didn't die with them. It's out there somewhere, growing, changing, preparing for whatever comes next. Top 3. I left the Coast Guard 6 months after the Epstein investigation began. Medical retirement. Officially. Post-traumatic stress, according to the paperwork. The truth was simpler. I couldn't stop seeing things. Not the bodies. Not the laboratory. Not even the hole. Though that featured in enough nightmares to last several lifetimes. No, what I couldn't stop seeing was what we found in the private chapel. The chapel stood at the eastern edge of the compound, positioned to catch the morning sun through stained glass windows that depicted scenes I didn't recognize. Not biblical. Not any religious tradition I could identify. Something older. Something that predated Christianity, predated organized religion, predated everything except the fundamental human need to worship powers beyond comprehension. The interior was dominated by an altar, not stone, not wood, bone. Human bone, fused together through some process I couldn't identify, shaped into a platform approximately 10 feet long and 5 feet wide. The bones came from hundreds of individuals. The forensic team spent 3 weeks cataloging them. Skulls and femurs and vertebrae and ribs, all merged into a single structure that had been growing for generations, that had been fed new material with every sacrifice, every victim, every person who disappeared into the Epstein family's century-long project. But the bones weren't the worst part. The worst part was what rested on the altar. A book, bound in leather that testing confirmed was human skin. Pages made from a parchment that predated the family's arrival on the island by centuries, possibly millennia. Text written in languages that linguistic experts couldn't identify, couldn't translate, couldn't even classify into any known language family. The book was old, older than the Epstein, older than Charleston, older than European presence in the Americas. Carbon dating suggested the newest sections were approximately 800 years old. The oldest sections couldn't be dated at all. The materials didn't behave the way organic materials were supposed to behave. The book had been the Epstein Guide. That much was clear from the family's own records. Cornelius Epstein had acquired it in 1845, 2 years before purchasing the island, from a source he described only as the custodian. The book had told him what to do, how to breed, how to prepare, how to open the door that would change everything. The family had followed its instructions faithfully for 6 generations. Everything they did, every experiment, every sacrifice, every carefully planned marriage and birth and death, all of it was laid out in the book's incomprehensible text. They were following a recipe, a blueprint, a set of instructions for creating something that the book promised would elevate humanity to its next stage of evolution. The book is in federal custody now, stored in a facility I don't have clearance to know about, studied by experts who report only to people whose names don't appear on any organizational chart. I've heard rumors about what they've found. Rumors that the text changes when you're not looking at it, that the pages rearrange themselves overnight, that readers who spend too long with the book begin to understand words they shouldn't be able to understand, concepts that human minds weren't designed to contain. 3 researchers have been hospitalized since the investigation began. 2 of them will never recover. The 3rd disappeared from a locked room with no windows and cameras that somehow failed to record anything except static. The book is dangerous, that's the official position. The book contains knowledge that humanity isn't ready for, that we may never be ready for, that could destroy us if improperly applied. The Epstein spent 6 generations applying it. They thought they were ready. They thought they had followed the instructions perfectly. They thought they were about to achieve something magnificent. Maybe they did. Maybe the thing they created, the door they opened, the entity they released, maybe that was exactly what the book promised. Maybe they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But if so, their success looked a lot like annihilation, and whatever came through that door, whatever the book taught them to summon, it's still out there, learning, adapting, becoming. The book promised transformation. The Epstein achieved it. Now the rest of us have to live with the consequences. Top 2. The children's wing was the last section of the compound we documented. It was also the reason I stopped. Sleeping, stopped eating, stopped being able to function as a normal human being for nearly a year after the investigation concluded. The wing was separate from the main house, connected by an underground passage that wasn't visible from the surface. It had been designed to be hidden, designed to be secret, designed to contain something that the family didn't want the outside world to know about. We found it on the 4th day of the investigation, when ground-penetrating radar revealed the tunnel. I led the team that went in first. I wish I hadn't. The wing was a school, or something that resembled a school. Classrooms with small desks and chalkboards, a library filled with books that weren't in any language I recognized, a gymnasium with equipment that looked normal until you examined it closely and realized the dimensions were wrong, designed for bodies that weren't quite human proportions, and dormitories. 20 rooms, each containing 4 beds, each bed showing signs of recent occupation. 80 children had lived in this wing. 80 children who weren't among the 15 bodies we found in the basement. 80 children who were nowhere on the island. 80 children who had simply vanished. The records we found told their story. They were Epstein children. Not all of them direct descendants, but all of them carrying the bloodline that the family had been cultivating for generations. They were the culmination of the breeding program, the final product, the vessels that had been prepared, generation after generation, to receive whatever the family was trying to create. They ranged in age from 4 to 16. They had been raised on the island, educated in the hidden school, trained in disciplines that the records described, but that I couldn't understand. They had never known the outside world. They had never known anything except their purpose. And when the door opened, when the family completed their great work, the children were taken. Not killed. The records were clear about that. The 15 adults died to open the door. The 80 children went through it. They were the payment, the offering, the seed that would grow into whatever the Epstein had promised their entire lineage to create. I try not to think about where they went. I try not to imagine what's happening to them, what they're becoming, what purpose they're serving in whatever place exists on the other side of that door. I try not to wonder if they're still alive in any meaningful sense, if they're still conscious, if they remember being human. But I can't stop. I can't stop seeing their rooms, their books, their small beds with carefully made sheets and stuffed animals that someone loved. I can't stop knowing that 80 children were raised for the sole purpose of being fed to something from somewhere else. The investigation found photographs, family albums documenting the children's growth, their education, their progress toward whatever destiny the family had planned for them. In every picture, the children are smiling. In every picture, they look happy. In every picture, they look like they have no idea what's coming. Maybe they didn't. Maybe the family kept them ignorant until the end. Maybe they went through the door believing it was an adventure, a graduation, a reward for all their years of preparation. I hope so. I hope they didn't know. I hope they weren't afraid. But late at night, when I can't sleep, when the memories won't leave, me alone, I remember one detail from the dormitories that I haven't told anyone else. One detail that suggests the children knew exactly what was going to happen. In every room, carved into the walls near the beds, hidden where adults wouldn't think to look, were messages. Different handwriting, different ages, different children communicating secretly over years, documenting their fear in the only way they could. The messages all said variations of the same thing. It's watching us. It's waiting. It's so hungry. Please, someone, find us before it's too late. No one found them, no one saved them. And now they're somewhere else, serving a purpose I can't imagine, for an entity I can't comprehend, in a place I pray I'll never have to see. 80 children, fed to the darkness, and the door is still there, sealed but not destroyed, waiting for someone to open it again. Top 1. It's been 4 years since the Epstein investigation. 4 years since I left the Coast Guard. 4 years. Since I stopped being the person I used to be and became whatever I am now. In that time, I've done my own research, compiled my own files, tracked every strange occurrence, every unexplained disappearance, every incident that might be connected to what came through the door on Epstein Island. What I've found keeps me awake at night. The incident started approximately 16 days after the family completed their ritual. The same 16 days that passed before we arrived on the island. 16 days when the door was open. 16 days when something had free access to our world. The first incident was in Savannah. A family of 5 vanished from their home, leaving behind a dinner table set for a meal they never finished. The only clue was a phrase written on the wall in something that looked like blood, but tested as an unknown organic compound. Thank you for preparing the way. The second incident was in Jacksonville. A homeless encampment, 23 people, disappeared overnight. No bodies, no evidence of violence, just empty tents and a smell that witnesses described as sweet and wrong and somehow familiar. The third incident was in Atlanta, a private school, exclusive, expensive, catering to the children of the city's wealthiest families. 15 students vanished during a field trip. The chaperones couldn't explain what happened. Security footage showed the children walking into a patch of shadow that shouldn't have existed and simply not walking out. The pattern continued. Charleston, Wilmington, Richmond, Washington, D.C., moving north, always north, following a trajectory that seemed deliberate, that seemed planned, that seemed like something learning the geography of a world it hadn't visited in a very long time. The victims weren't random. I've analyzed the data, cross-referenced the disappearances, built profiles of everyone who vanished. They share common characteristics: old families, old money, old blood, as the Epstein records would put it. Lineages that trace back generations, that carry markers that most people wouldn't know to look for. The thing that came through the door isn't hunting randomly. It's following a list, a registry of bloodlines that someone, somewhere, compiled over centuries. It's harvesting, collecting, gathering the raw material it needs for whatever comes next. And the Epstein weren't alone. That's the part that keeps me up at night. The part that makes me check my locks 3 times before I try to sleep. The part that makes me carry a weapon everywhere I go, even though I know it wouldn't help. The Epstein were one family, one node in a network that spans the globe. The book they followed, the one bound in human skin, the one that's sitting in a federal vault, being studied by people who are slowly losing their minds, that book has copies. Other families have been following the same instructions, other bloodlines have been preparing for the same purpose, other doors have been built all over the world, waiting for their moment to open. The Epstein were first. They won the race to complete their preparations. They got to be the family that opened the initial door, that released the initial entity, that started the process that will eventually consume everything. But they weren't the only ones trying. And the thing that came through their door, the thing that's been harvesting bloodlines up and down the eastern seaboard, it's been communicating with the other families, with the other doors, with the other entities waiting on the other side, hungry and patient and so very ready to begin. The sealed door on Epstein Island isn't the only weak point anymore. There are others, opening slowly, letting things through, one at a time at first, then faster, then more and more until the trickle becomes a flood and everything we know is swept away. I found one of the other families, the Blackwoods, based in Connecticut. Old money, old blood, a history that parallels the Epstein in every way that matters. They've been preparing for generations. They're almost ready. Their door is almost complete. I tried to warn someone. I tried to alert the agencies that investigated Epstein Island. I tried to make them understand that this isn't over, that it's barely begun, that we're watching the opening moves of something that will eventually destroy us all. They didn't listen. They couldn't listen. The knowledge is too big. The threat is too enormous. The implications are too terrifying for any official body to acknowledge, let alone address. So I'm making this recording. I'm documenting everything I know. I'm leaving a trail for whoever comes after, whoever survives, whoever has the strength to face what's coming. The Epstein opened a door. Something came through. That something is preparing the way for others, and the doors are opening, one by one, family by family, all over the world. The children taken from Epstein Island, the 80 vessels prepared over 6 generations, they were just the beginning. The seed that would grow into something unimaginable. They're still out there, somewhere else, becoming something else. And when they're ready, when the transformation is complete, they're coming back, all of them. Everything the Epstein created, everything the other families are creating. Everything that's been waiting on the other side of doors that humanity should never have learned to build. They're coming back, and we're not ready. We'll never be ready. But maybe if enough people know, if enough people understand, if enough people prepare, some of us might survive. Some of us might find a way to close the doors. Some of us might learn how to fight back. That's the only hope I have left. The only reason I keep going, keep researching, keep documenting the horror that's slowly spreading across everything I know. The Epstein thought they were building a future. They thought they were creating something magnificent. They thought they were elevating humanity to its next stage. Maybe they were right. Maybe what's coming is evolution. Maybe the thing that consumed them, that took their children, that's harvesting bloodlines across the world, maybe it's exactly what humanity needs to become. But I've seen the evidence, I've read the files, I've looked into the darkness at the center of Epstein Island and felt it looking back. Whatever's coming isn't evolution, it's extinction, dressed up in the language of transcendence, wrapped in the promise of transformation, sold to desperate families who wanted to believe they could become something more than human. The Epstein are gone. Their island is sealed. Their legacy is classified, but their work continues. In other families, in other places, in other doors that are opening right now as you listen to this, as you try to decide whether to believe what I'm telling you, believe it, prepare, and pray that when the doors finally open wide, you're not on the harvest list, because the thing that came through the Epstein door is still hungry, and it's only just begun to feed. What they found on Epstein Island: one family, 6 generations, a door that should never have been opened. For 5, the basement laboratory contents, genetic research facilities, specimen jars containing hybrid organisms, documentation of breeding programs spanning 172 years. Purpose: cultivation of specific bloodline traits required for unknown transformation. There are 4, the medical wing contents, surgical facilities, subjectee records, evidence of human experimentation. Victim count, estimated 200-400 over family's tenure. Purpose: refinement of procedures later applied to family offspring. Number 3, the chapel and the book contents, altar constructed from fused human bones, text of unknown origin bound in human skin. Age, portions date to 800+ years, oldest sections undatable. Purpose: instructions for breeding program, door construction, and entity summoning. Number 2, the children's wing contents, hidden educational facility. For 80 Epstein children raised in isolation. Status: all children missing, believed transported through open door. Purpose: preparation of vessels for receiving summoned entity. Number 1, the door location, basement, center of ritual circle. Status: currently sealed under federal supervision. Properties: defies physical analysis, corrupts recording equipment, causes psychological damage to observers. Purpose: gateway to unknown location, opened through family's final ritual. The Epstein family spent 6 generations preparing to open a door to somewhere else. They succeeded. What came through took them. What came through is still here. And the Epstein weren't alone. Other families, other doors, other entities waiting to come through. The harvest has begun.